Welcome. Hi, my name is Ashok Panikkar, and welcome to MetaCulture Studio. I have a little spiel that I like to give before we get started. Just so you know, this is going to be a very unscripted conversation, but in order to make sure that I get the basic business stuff out of the way, I am sharing a very scripted note with you. Starting in 2008 and pretty much full time from 2013 to 2014. As the liberal world order started visibly deteriorating, I found myself trying to alert people to what I saw as the real and present dangers to civilization. As you can see from the current state of India, the rise of authoritarian China, the economic and military weakening of the West, and the collapsing of social systems across the world, I may have been understating the urgency. Just for the record, without liberal democracies, ideas like peace, equality, and justice would be irrelevant. For that matter, without liberal democracy, you can give up on protesting the government's actions, reading your favorite authors, or even talking candidly amongst friends. Those lovely folks in China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and our homegrown despots will tell us what is permissible. Since 2017, from my home office in Washington, D.C., I've been trying to educate people about our existential and civilizational crisis. You can find out more about our courses and activities from the link on the chat. The Metaculture Studio conversations are an attempt to go back to the very foundations of what it means to be a society. Go back to the basic foundation that underpins all social activities. And I would even say civilization itself, the warm and intelligent conversation. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of arguments, defensive reactions, venting, raging, opinions, angry people trying to beat up on each other or to make their point. Here we are not trying to persuade or even excite. Here we are trying to model what gentle but meaningful conversations may look like. Each segment, I invite someone very special, not because he's a famous writer or she is a brilliant scientist. My guests are here because they are sincere thinkers and good conversationists whose company I enjoy. Welcome, Rico.
Hello, everybody.
I'm so delighted to have you here, Rico, particularly since before we got started, you did share with me that you're going through a really slightly difficult time. I'm gratified. If you had canceled, I would have completely understood. But Rico, rather than my introducing you, I would love to have you tell the group, whoever is watching, and for the many who I hope will watch after today, something about yourself, a little bit of your professional as well as your personal background. Who is Rico?
Sure. So, I guess in addition to being an alumnus of metaculture, I'm also a racial equity practitioner for an organization called All Aces Inc., which is based out of Boston. Like yourself, Ashok, I also have a background in conflict resolution and also a background in the arts. So before I got into conflict resolution, I studied to be a poet, although there isn't much by way of poetry industry jobs, as you may have heard. Um, Another thing that a lot of people would not guess based on my appearance is that I'm from New Hampshire. And I think a lot of the way that I think about things is very much because I grew up as a Filipino American kid in New Hampshire and really had no idea which way was up for most of my life.
Thank you. Thank you, Rico. And I just want to say, Rico is one of the people that I have uh, enjoyed having really complex conversations with. And at multiple times, Rico has challenged me to be much more clear and even sensible about many of the views that I normally espouse. So, again, delighted to have you here, Rico. Let me start off by uh, picking on something that you mentioned, your Filipino American background.
Sure.
Could you tell us how that background, how being a Filipino American affected the way you view issues related to race and racism? If you can go back to your earliest days in
Hmm.
childhood, when did you become, and because of your background, when did you become conscious of these issues, and how did that affect you?
Well, that's kind of a hard question, but to go back to my earliest experience where I really understood that race had something to do with how I was treated and what I was able to do. Um, I remember when I was about 5 years old, I was asked by a neighbor's mother where my family came from. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I know that I was kind of capitalizing on the fact that, oh, there's an adult who doesn't know something, and so I can change what happens. I can change what she thinks. And so what I told her was that my family were Eskimos, and I know that's not the preferred term these days, and that we'd previously lived in Alaska and lived in an igloo. And so later that day, my father kind of took me aside and really was interrogating me, like, "Well, why did you do that?" And I was 5. I really couldn't articulate exactly what it was. But years later, what I understood is, oh, this person doesn't know how to treat me. And so I can do anything with this, and she will believe me. And that became an incredibly powerful thing, right? So if you give people talk about giving a kid a box of matches and the destructive potential there, but having the faintest glimmer that race was a powerful thing in my hands as a child, I think it was too awesome a power to wield, right? So I ended up using it as a kid would do to get out of certain things that were uncomfortable for me,
Mm.
or to add pressure where I didn't think that I had leverage. And I experimented with it a lot, and what I found is, yeah, there are definitely people out there who would give me deference because they thought that I had something to say. But I was a kid; I had nothing to say. I was like, Filipino American simply because of my ethnicity, not in any real cultural way. So for the viewer, there's not a robust Filipino American community in New Hampshire. It was pretty much, at the time, it was me and my family, and there was really nobody else that had the same background.
Thank you. Oh, just um, for the record, I do know a Filipino American woman who is married to an Indian who I've known from childhood. And if Linda, you are here, if you're interested, I can connect the two of you because her experiences are really interesting growing up. I think she grew up in LA. I'm not
Okay.
too certain. Anyway, um, I'm curious. So this is really fascinating. The way you, as a child, took on the way others noticed your difference and how you leveraged it, worked with it, had fun with it. You had some power with it.
Mm.
How has that changed as an adult?
Well, so as an adult, I've really been able to spend more time kind of connecting with Filipino culture, certainly, and also Filipino American culture, which are distinct. Um, for one thing, many people in the Philippines, they have this attitude of, oh, if you can't speak the language, if you've never been to the Philippines, then you're not, quote unquote, really Filipino. Of course, the government says things like, well, if you're at least half Filipino, then you're eligible for citizenship. So it's like a very kind of confusing set of messages. But I guess that's something that I've gotten used to. As far as Filipino American culture, I'm really still just kind of learning about that. As you mentioned, your friend uh, was from LA, I think.
Yeah, and everyone thought just she was Chinese. It's a simple
Yeah,
thing. They just
yeah,
thought because she's white and she had Filipino features, so she's Chinese.
yeah. It's very few people that have correctly identified me as Filipino on site. Um, but what I do know is that certainly here on the West Coast, I'm also on the West Coast, by the way, everybody. There's a much stronger and much more well developed Filipino American culture, right? So, for those that know Daly City, close to San Francisco, that's sometimes referred to as like Little Manila. And there are people that I know from there who will joke around and say things like, "Oh, it's like I never left the Philippines," or "It's like the Philippines with fog." And but yeah, that's really the only kind of really fully developed Filipino enclave that I'm
Right.
aware of in the U.S.
Thank you, Rico. And one minor question and then a
Yeah.
longer one. I'm going to give you both and you can respond to it. And of course, needless to say, if you have any questions for me, given that I'm a white Scandinavian, I don't understand race the way you folks do, feel free to ask me.
Thank
So,
you, my
my
Nordic friend.
my minor question is, do you feel offended or upset when people ask you questions like, where are you from? Or they notice that you are not um, like them, one.
Yeah.
And secondly, could you also tell us something about the work you do? You work on racial equity,
Mhm.
which is so current and it is a huge thing today.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know, one, why you think this is work you want to do, and yeah, educate us about what racial equity means and how your organization works with it.
So which piece would you like me to respond
The
to first?
first one first, which is, do you feel offended? I mean, when someone
Oh
asks,
yeah.
"Hey, where are you from? Where do you come from? Where are you originally from?"
So usually the question that is offensive is comes in the second time, right? So there's where are you from? Not offensive. That's fine. I'm from New Hampshire, right? It's when I do that and somebody kind of, they scrunch up their face or whatever and they say, "No, where are you really from?" You know? So growing up in New England, I learned that often what they were asking is, or often it wasn't actually a question, right? What somebody wanted to highlight is you're not from here and you
Mm,
don't have as much right to talk about whatever you're talking about or do whatever you're doing as I do.
mm,
Right. So the response that I learned, and I do apologize for the coarseness of language, but how I learned to respond was when somebody asks, "Where are you really from?" is to say, "From my fucking mother. What's it to you?"
mm. Thank you. Thank you for the coarseness. Sometimes there are no other ways to express oneself. I really appreciate your candor. Can I just push a little more here?
Yeah, please.
Why do you presume that they are, it, through the second question, where are you really from? Why
Mhm.
do you presume, or what makes you believe that they are questioning your right to be here?
Yeah. Well, so what I've often noticed when that kind of secondary question comes in is, well, as you know, when people first meet, they're kind of probing. They're trying to see how they should treat the other person, right? And it's a dance that we all do in our various cultures, right? So, for example, when I lived in Vietnam, I was really kind of put off by people asking me how old I was, if I was married, how much money I made, what my job title was. They were trying to figure out what pronoun to use for me to give me the proper amount of respect, right? That's effectively what that question, where are you really from, is trying to do, but not from any kind of innocent place often. It's often like, well, I'd like to be dominant here.
Mm.
you
So
know?
that's what you're hearing.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, right. Thank you.
So when I was younger, I would kind of demur, I'd say, no, I'm really from New Hampshire. But there were times where people would keep pushing it, you know, like, no, you can't
Right.
really be from New Hampshire. You can't really be an American citizen, right?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for your candor. Now, the second question
Yeah,
about, why do you do this work? Not that it isn't already a little clear to me, but, can you expound on that a little more?
sure. Yeah, well, so my graduate thesis was on conflict resolution and also about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right. So I got very interested in conflict, particularly among, in the context of work. And some of the conflicts that I became really interested in were those that involved people of different ethnicities and things like that. And for me, part of the fascinating thing about doing that research is I started to uncover a lot of things that I recognized in my own life and my own, kind of
Yeah.
journey. And well, as you've also seen, getting a job in conflict resolution that pays really well is a challenge, right? And so I was looking for jobs, and I was able to get connected with Dr. Martin, and that's kind of how I ended up working in racial equity. But the thing that kind of keeps me there is kind of the same thing that got me researching is there are things about the work that I can see in myself. And, I don't, I mentioned my childhood a little bit. And what I noticed and what I really didn't like is that I was becoming a very defensive person, and I would often use my words to kind of maintain control over the situation, and that would often involve doing things like so if somebody would kind of come at me with some kind of joke about being Asian and all the stuff associated with those stereotypes in this culture, I would often, as the kids say, I would roast that person, meaning that I would make fun of them. And I was very good at it. In fact, was able to make people cry very easily by the things that I would say.
It was a survival mechanism.
Right. Well, and there might be people at home watching who are saying, yeah, well, that there are many ways to kind of address adversity or conflict. But when you're a kid and when you're confused and in pain and you don't really know why, it's a lot easier to lash out than to look inward. And even if you are able to look inward, it's hard to make sense of any of that stuff, especially when your brain is being assaulted by hormones in school and whatever.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I'm sure you have questions for me, but I just want to, before you ask me any questions, I want to just touch on my personal way of responding to that, to people asking me this question. And just so you know, this is a question I'm asked even in India.
Mm. Why is
Okay,
that?
it's not a new thing. Well, India is a composite state made up of completely different ethnic groups, racial groups, linguistic groups, religious groups. People are like your experience in Vietnam. People are always trying to figure out who you are
Mm.
so that they can peg you in the conversation.
Mm.
If they meet you socially, they want to know whether you can be trusted. They
Yeah.
want to know whether you're one of them. And if you're not, it doesn't mean that they will walk away, but it means that they will decide how much of intimacy or engagement they wish to offer you.
Hmm.
And so, one of the things, and this is probably different from most Americans, I grew up with this all the time. I
Sure.
lived in the Middle East. This is the way it was everywhere in the Middle East. So, for me, I have never experienced anyone getting angry about being asked, but where are you really from? Because for me, That is the norm in every part of the world when someone looks different or talks different.
Mm.
So when I come to the US and even 20-year-old college students, even when I ask them out of curiosity, when they say, when I ask you, and I've had this exchange with 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, and they evidently don't look white Christian, from the hijab to whatever, dreadlocks to whatever, and their color. And I ask them because I want to connect with them. I say, so where are you from? Not my first question, but maybe my seventh question. And
Yeah.
then they say, well, I'm from New Hampshire or Atlanta. And I say, yes, I can see that. Your English and everything else shows that been brought up here. But I'm really curious about where your forefathers or foremothers came from. And
Oh,
I get slammed. I get
well,
slammed.
but that has a very different energy, and I'm
No, but
surprised to hear
please
that.
understand, it doesn't have to mean for me. Look, I'm not getting into an argument with you about why you're reacting that way, the way you do. But for me, it's really problematic. And I came to this kind of a very careful, walking on eggshells kind of a question because it's my personal mission not to not to be fake,
Hmm.
not to pretend in order to keep the peace.
Yeah.
So even if I like someone, or sometimes it's just, I'm curious. This is how I build connection. This is how I build trust. And in the beginning, I used to ask, but they asked you, where are you really from? Where are your people from? And I would get slammed, not by the older folk,
Mm.
but by very young people. And then I realized over the past 15 years or so that there is, that this has become a political thing in the US. And I do not experience this almost anywhere else in the world.
Mm.
Now, for me, as I said, it's just my way of responding to it. I realize most other people see it as offensive, but people ask me the same question in million ways. They ask
Yeah.
me even more uh, pushy questions. How did you get here?
Hmm.
Meaning, as a brown person, are you an illegal immigrant?
Right.
Uh, what visa are you on? Questions that would be deemed very invasive. And for me, because of the work I do, I realize that the question is not, and I speak only for myself, Rico. I'm not suggesting that this is the way everyone should be. But the work I do in terms of figuring out how to sustain liberal, pluralistic societies, and that's where I'm coming from, other than my experience. I take for granted that any society requires a level of trust.
Hmm.
Any society In any society, particularly a diverse society, people are dancing around each other, trying to figure out whether they trust enough to collaborate, trust enough to cooperate, trust enough to stand up against the forces that are attacking the larger society. And for me, if you do not address some of these issues, you don't get there. So
Sure.
that's where I'm coming from. But
Yeah.
again, you can respond to that, but you can also ask me questions because,
Yeah.
I don't want
So
to interview you.
I can't speak for everybody, of course, but it's if somebody straight up asks me, "Oh, what's your ethnicity?" That's a very different flavor than "Where are you from?" No, where are you really from, right? So taking that disbelief out of it, well, that changes things for me, right?
Right.
It doesn't
And
piss
I
me
think
off.
you're very sophisticated. You understand nuances of language. My mother would not.
Yeah,
I mean, and my mother would just ask very, hey, but really, where are you from? And it's
yeah,
just out of curiosity. She's not
yeah,
taken conflict resolution,
yeah.
communication courses, nonviolent communication. She's just honestly asking,
But genuine
you know,
curiosity has a very lands very differently, right? So we can often feel out when somebody's being genuinely curious, right? They might not
I'm not
be
sure.
speaking so eloquently. Yeah, we might not always, but I think for me, more often than not, I am able to get a decent sense of how somebody is, what's behind their question, or I like to think that anyway.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you're more sophisticated than those 22-year-olds I was talking about. But
I'd hope so.
all my curiosity didn't make, and to date, does not make any difference.
Yeah.
And so, and because I work on critical thinking, I also know how prejudiced people are
Hmm.
and how I would distrust most people's instincts, because I think we are really not in a position to understand each other without tremendous investment. But
Oh, I agree.
again, it doesn't mean that exceptionally people like you might have that capacity. So I'm not debating that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, after I graduated with my degree in poetry, I was an English language teacher in Vietnam for a long time. And I bring that up because what I realized in doing that work is most people are horrible at communication.
Right. Right.
Right. So a lot of people walk around assuming that because they can speak, they can think a little bit, they can read and write, that they know how to communicate. Bullshit. If they did, we wouldn't have half of the problems that we do. And we have not only all of those problems, but I'm sure many others that we haven't uncovered.
Absolutely. So while on the subject, and again, I don't want to stick on this for a long time.
Yeah,
I'm waiting for you to ask me some questions, but
sure.
let me just ask you another question. If you want to sustain a diverse society, should we be hypersensitive to these things, or can we roll with it? Because people are struggling in a diverse society to make sense.
Yeah,
One of the things that I realized, and it took me a few years in the US to realize this, that I'm totally okay now with walking into a smaller town or a neighborhood, say an Irish neighborhood in Boston, and people look at me strangely. This is in Boston, one of the most diverse societies, and people look at me strangely. And for me to not be offended by that, and for me to think, well, think about it. How many people looking like me show up in their bars?
sure.
How many people looking like me end up in a school, in a Catholic school, trying to teach something to their children?
Yeah.
And don't they have the right to actually figure me out before they trust their social space, before they trust their neighborhood and their schools to me? If I sit on my high horse saying I have as much right as anyone else to be here, am I not in the process making it much harder for them to connect with me? It's just something I struggle with.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. So in that example, it's kind of dependent on well, you know, how to say this. I guess what I'm trying to get at is for an interaction to take place, it takes two,
Right, right, right,
right?
right.
So there are things on both sides. There are things that you can be doing and things that they can be doing, wouldn't you say? So I guess my counter question is, well, why should it all be on you or them? Isn't this a
Great question. So, can I answer this in two
yeah,
parts? And I'll keep it very simple. First part, unfortunately, life isn't fair.
yeah,
No communication is always reciprocal.
hmm,
No two people have the same skills and maturity in any situation. It's always incumbent on the person who starts a communication to set the tone and
yeah,
to be more generous. If I am not, if I say hello to you and you ask me, but where are you really from, Ashok? That's not an American name. I you are immediate, and if I react to that badly, I am effectively guaranteeing that the two of us will not get to know each other. So if I want to say hello, if I want to walk into an Irish bar or a Haitian bar, if
yeah,
I want to teach in a Catholic school in Alabama, the onus is on me to make some effort here, encouraging them to also get to know me. And again, it's because life isn't fair. It's not fair anywhere in the world. So that's my first thing. The second reason is because, well, I don't know if I folded it in already to the first reason, but why is it on me? Because This comes out of my work in diversity and democracy. Diversity is a pain in the butt
It sure
in
is.
every society. In other words, if I marry someone not from my ethnicity or religion, the onus has to be on me to repair the damages that have been done to my tribe by helping me and my bride reintegrate with the tribe.
Yeah.
If I, and I've lived in the Arab Gulf, there are no illusions. I
Right.
am fourth class or fifth class subject, not even a citizen, right?
Hmm.
I'm not allowed to become a citizen under any circumstances. Okay. Now, if I'm an outsider in a society that is been for hundreds, if not thousands of years, very Arab and Muslim,
Sure.
it is my responsibility to engage with that society in a way that I do not disturb the society beyond a reasonable way. Because my very presence is disturbing that society in multiple ways. Okay, so my understanding of diversity is a little different from the rights based approach. And now we can get into race itself. From the rights based approach, that is very current in the US and certain Western societies. My approach towards diversity is that if you, for whatever reason, either because you're an immigrant or because of life circumstances or because you choose to be different. I paint my hair scarlet and I have tattoos and nose rings and I walk around in my Indian society. The onus is on me to figure out whether I want to be part of that society anymore and how much effort I will make. It is not on them to bend backwards to accommodate me.
Sure.
So the way I see it, the what has happened, and I'd like you to respond to this. What has happened with the American rights-based communities is that they have decided that the dominant group has to always make the effort in order to accommodate us, people who are in minority, who are minorities, and to make us feel welcomed. That make us feel belonged. You see, it's artificial. I would like it. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong. I got married to a white person. I wanted to be seen as just another one of their people getting married to Stacy. It is the most stupid thing for me to expect that because I'm the first colored person in that family. They have questions, they have enormous amount of fear and insecurity. I have to work with them. So I'm just going to leave it there. Do you see any dangers to this rights based, offense based approach to looking at race itself? That we demand equality right now at
Yeah.
every level, otherwise, this is an oppressive society.
Well, okay. So to respond to that last part first, I guess. Well, I think it would be a very different story if, you know, the US didn't run around saying like, well, we guarantee these rights to all of our
Mm,
citizens, and you can't run around making promises and then get mad when people ask you to fulfill them,
right.
right? So but even the concept of rights, I think it's a very powerful one, right? But I don't think anybody sits down and teaches us how to handle having rights. I certainly don't recall that in my education. What I recall is, here, this is the Bill of Rights. These are the people that fought for it and some of the reasons why. And then here, they belong to you now. Well, I'm 10. I don't know what to do with this. How does this? And then that was it.
Right.
Right. Now
Right.
go be a citizen and act democratically. I don't know how.
Right.
I've
Right.
never done
Right.
this before.
You've touched on something that I'm so passionate about, and I totally agree with you. Members or citizens or children of citizens of democratic countries have no idea what it means to be citizens. They have no clue. And this is true
Yeah.
of I know people who have PhDs in political science. from the best American universities who do not understand what it means to be a citizen in a democratic country.
Yeah.
And you're right, we have done a terrible job of educating ourselves and our children in terms of what it means to be one, to live in a democracy, what it means to conduct yourself as a citizen in a democracy. We
Yeah.
think as long as we follow traffic rules, pay taxes, and vote, we are, hey, golden. And on
Yeah.
top of that, I go on a march to Washington and I am, whoa, an
Yeah.
ultimate Democrat. That is stupid. So,
Yeah.
I just want to agree with you on that.
So
But
let me ask you this though,
can
Ashok.
I go back to the first point you made?
Okay, yeah.
You did mention this, and I after that, please ask me what you want to. I don't want to miss this point. You said if the U.S. didn't run around the world saying we have this constitution, we have these rights, and give us your poor and your disenfranchised and everything else, this wouldn't happen. Now,
Mm,
I have a different take to it.
yeah.
I have a
I'm
very
sure.
different take to it. And my take is this: the US 250 odd years ago was the first society in on the planet and historically that tried to enshrine these values.
Hmm.
It was by no means, if you read the founders and their discussions and their confusions and dilemmas and their mistakes after writing the Constitution, um, it was by no means clear that the US would even last 10 to 20 years.
Sure.
But they were very clear
Yeah.
that this is something we should aspire for.
Hmm.
It was never that this is what we are.
Yeah.
Now, that's the first thing. So we have misunderstood
Yeah.
uh, 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 what is no more than an aspiration as a fixed reality. And then we judge an aspiration by whether the US is living up to it. So that's just
Yeah.
part one. Part
No, you're
one.
right. So people
So,
treat aspirations as a checklist, right?
right.
But
And
there's
that's
nobody
problematic.
saying, "Hey, don't treat this as a checklist." And we
Right.
need that.
So, no, but again, it's because we are uneducated.
Yeah.
I say it's we are uneducated. Like, look, I was not taught any of these things, and I'm not holding myself up as any kind of an example. But because I was really interested in these issues, I did my own education.
Hmm.
And it became very clear to me very early on that societies don't function the way they do because of what's in the constitution.
Right.
So that's one. So I don't blame the Indian leaders or the Indian textbooks. I blame my peers in India for not having done the educational work themselves, for not understanding Indian democracy. But that's another matter. Let me just finish this. So the first thing is these are aspirations. The second thing is it is true that the US is one of the few countries that has genuinely tried to make it happen.
True.
Look, you've grown up all your lives, other than in Vietnam, in the US. I know how messed up most of the countries are. And I know that even today, with Donald Trump and everything else, I am freer in the US as a brown man. This might seem difficult for many people working on issues on race to understand, but even without a citizenship, I have more rights in the US. When I was a student or working on an H-1B visa, I had more rights in the US than I had as a citizen in India,
Hmm.
because there are certain institutions in place and there are checks and balances that give
Yeah.
me some of those rights. These are very flawed, and the problem with the what I see as a problem with the way we look at rights and power and oppression is we put them in boxes and we say this is what you have to do, and we don't understand
I think we lost a shock.
internet problems.
There we go. Oh, there you are.
Hey, are you back on? I thought we had connectivity problems. Okay, so I'm going to stop. But again, can we bring this? We talked about race, and I really want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions or thoughts? so we can really focus on race, other than the larger issue of diversity itself.
Yeah. So the concept of freedom, right? So we're talking about how we don't really teach people how to be citizens, but we also instill in citizens here this idea that what makes us American is that we are free. When you don't teach people what to do with freedom or what freedom actually is, they try to apply what they understand of the thing to every situation. And often it's a miserable, miserable failure.
Right.
So it's great to be free. But a lot of people that I've encountered in the US, they can't even imagine what it's like to be so free that you start to understand that it's a bad idea, that there's such thing as too much freedom. And I'm not here advocating for any kind of authoritarian state or anything like that. But I've been privileged enough to live a life where I've experienced what it's like to be incredibly, incredibly free. And let me tell you what it feels like. It feels like you're on a tightrope and there's no net. Because when you're really free, you don't have social support. You don't have a lot of the support that you expect, that you hope for when something goes wrong. And I really wish that there were a way to impart this lesson to the majority of our citizens, because I think it would change how we think about our relationships with one another. All right.
Right.
So my
I have
absolute
no. Yeah.
freedom, it doesn't mean absolute freedom for everybody else.
Right.
Right. And that sounds like, well, what kind of immature person holds that kind of worldview? We'd be shocked, if we could look inside people's heads. I know for
You
a
get
fact that
no
we would be
quarrel
shocked.
from me here. I totally agree with you. I was just wondering if you had any questions for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that was something that was leading to a question, but since we seem to agree on that point, I guess I'll
That's
cede.
what I taught. That's what I taught you in Demo Sapiens: the balance between freedom, security, and equality,
Well,
and
so
that
that was
there
an
is no.
interesting framework. I'd never seen
Right.
that, but
Right.
already coming into that, that was something that I'd been through and had been on my mind. So it was gratifying to see that articulated in that way for sure.
So again, if you don't have questions, I have enough questions for you.
Yeah,
So let me ask you, Rico,
yeah,
do you see that there is, what are some of the good things coming out of this obsession with race? Because you're working in the smack middle of it on racial equity.
right.
So what are some of the positives, and beyond the obvious ones, making people aware of it and all that, uh, given that so many people, because as you said, you took this work rather than conflict resolution because it paid well. It's my experience that there are two areas where there's tremendous amount of money right now. One is on women's issues, the other one is on race. This is where, if I geared metaculture to one of these, or sexuality issues, I would get funding.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to do that. So
Mhm.
what are some of the good things that come out of this focus, extraordinary focus on race?
So, yeah, before we get to that, I do have a clarifying question to ask you. So, when you first asked the question, it was, why are we obsessing, or why are we so obsessed with race? And I wonder if you can kind of, help me to understand that perspective a little bit. So,
i
of
will
course,
I
it's
will,
a
but
hot issue right now, but
right.
you use this term several times, and I'm just kind of curious about it.
And I will, because it's the second question that I'm going to ask you, and I will qualify it when before I ask my second question. But the first thing, because I don't want this to be, and but the studio conversations are not supposed to be an argument, but we are totally interested in disagreements.
Yeah.
So and I don't want to take a simplistic stance attacking anything. So I am quite certain that there is a lot of good that comes out of the work that you do. I
Okay.
want you to tell me and the group what are some of the powerful positives from focusing like this on race, not just from all aces, but from others who are doing good work.
Yeah. Well, so one of the positives is that we're able to help people to understand things that they've gone through, that they've experienced, but maybe they don't have language to articulate. Right. So I was talking about some experiences when I was a child. And it wasn't really until I went to grad school that I started to have kind of a vocabulary for some of the things that I'd experienced. Now, of course, having that vocabulary, it means that introspection became a lot more productive when it came to thinking about race. So I think that's a real positive. I think another positive is that it allows people to start to question why things are the way that they are. Now, I will freely admit that once we start down the road of questioning, a lot of different things can happen, and I'd be lying if all of them were good. But if we want to go back to Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, it's like when we don't question the things that we're doing, we often end up doing things that are maybe not so great or not in line with our values or the things that we try to uphold. So I think that's a positive as well. Um, if I had to list a third one, I guess it would be that it tries to address the elephant in the room, which are that the proportions of our population's demographics are changing and rapidly, right? So I think for me, what I'm seeing is we're still very much a society that adheres to the idea of strength in numbers. And so we've known that at some point in the near future, white people are not going to be the dominant group in the US anymore. And, the implication there is that, well, because they are the majority, that's how people hold on to power. I don't necessarily think that's true, but that concept is so deeply dyed in the wool, I think, that these shifts in demographics are very, very alarming to people. And one way or the other, we're going to have to address this demographic change.
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to add a couple more positives. For me, issues of diversity, including race, and in every country, the the challenges of diversity are different. In
Hmm.
France, it's North Africans and religion. In India, it's Muslims, and of course, India has everything in the mix, caste and language and everything. It's chaos. Um, but in the US, it's African Americans as a special category beyond you and me.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. Now, for me, one of the biggest positives of talking about race or gender or sexuality or anything is that it allows for a complex conversation. It allows for us to see our society in a more nuanced, complex way, because society is not just the dominant group. So I'm
Yeah,
totally clear about it. And the more we complexify it, we bring in the other not so obvious, not so overt, not so strong strains and threads into the larger fabric. So I think I need people to know that I have been a diversity trainer since 1996. So
right,
I'm not coming at this as a right-wing person who doesn't want to talk about race. I have
right.
been doing that for 25 years. One.
Hmm. Hmm.
The same is true with, and I have the same problem with a lot of people uneasy when I question the emphasis on gender or I
Right.
question the emphasis on sexuality. Now, so this is an important conversation to happen.
Yeah.
So very clearly. Now I will respond to your question, which is why do I use the term obsessing? I never thought it as obsession when I started doing this work in the mid to late 90s. Even in the early 2000s, it was clear to me, and I did this work in other countries too, most notably, other than the US, in India. It was important to raise issues about gender, sexuality, etc., and bring them to the fore.
Hmm.
But in the last 10 years, the world has changed.
Sure.
Today, for me, the more people focus on special groups, and I know people get pissed off when I say women are another special identity group or a race or whatever. They say, well, but that's different. Women are different from other groups, or African Americans are different from other groups. And I say, yes, but the entire society and the political structure that gives any rights to women, that gives any rights to African Americans, that gives any rights to brown people or gay people or refugees is
Yeah.
under threat. And it's under threat not just in the US, it's under threat globally. In
Sure.
a time like that, should we not take a step back from uh, what I am provocatively calling obsessing on race, but you could just as well obsess about gender or trans issues? Are you not in the process beating up on an extremely fragile system because it's not good enough? It's flawed. And what happens when that weak, fragile system, as the American democracy is now today, it is just a couple of beatings away from collapsing?
Yeah,
And
that's
even
clear.
political analysts now, I've been saying this for 10, 15 years, but political analysts now will tell you that even civil war is possible in this country.
Hmm.
This country is so polarized, the chances of it holding together are reducing on a weekly or monthly basis. Shouldn't we start focusing about preserving the system instead of destroying the system so we can create an ideal system on top of it? That's why, and it's only in that context that I use the term obsessing, because, and I use this analogy a lot. If my house is burning, I mean,
Yeah.
our house is burning, and you want to, and if I'm upset with you and I want to resolve my issue with you before I help protect the house, we are both doomed.
No, I
We're doomed.
agree. I agree. And that analogy that you're using, what kind of popped into my mind is, to me, it kind of seems like what you're describing in terms of the fragility of our democracy. That's like a gas leak that's going on at the same time that the house is burning, right?
Mm-mm.
So,
No,
no?
no, no. The house is burning probably because of a gas leak. But there are other problems in the house, problem between you and me, between you
Yeah,
and your mother, between me and my neighbor. All of that is happening and has been happening for generations.
sure.
But the house, entire house or the neighborhood is burning right now.
Hmm. Okay.
So for me, it's a logical thing. It's okay. Let me give you another example. I have, let's just say I have arthritis, I have bad eyes, I have acne, I have weak liver, but I get a heart attack. At that point in time, the doctors are not going to worry about my arthritis or anything unless it's about contraindications in terms of medication.
Sure.
They are going to preserve my life by dealing with the heart attack.
Yeah.
At that point in time, my acne or my arthritis, however painful it is irrelevant until
Yeah.
I recover. That's where I'm coming from, Rico.
No, I understand. And let me try again. So, what I was trying to get at is, I hear you loud and clear, but I am not convinced that a lot of people understand how fragile our democracy is.
I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about other people.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm talking about you because you and me are totally agreed on the fact that most people don't know.
Yeah.
Most people don't know anything.
Hmm.
But we all have opinions, as Twitter and Facebook will demonstrate.
Of
But
course.
I am talking with you not in the context of what do other people think, because we are not polling here. It's
Sure.
you and me. I have tremendous respect for you. I love talking with you, and you and I are having an intimate conversation. Yes, privy to the world, but intimate conversation as people who are sincerely trying to understand a situation. So
Yeah.
for this conversation, I'm not really worried about whether the others who are listening will understand. I'm focused on you.
Sure. Well, I mean, So when I'm at work, of course, I'm working on racial equity. Of course, for me as an individual, our democracy is something that I'm very concerned about. Um, I guess what I'm hearing you ask is, isn't my work kind of counter to that interest in preserving our democracy? Is that right?
So I don't want to, and it's not my intention to make anyone feel bad about the work that they do. Seriously,
Hmm.
because you're doing good work. As I said, racial work, gender work, these are good work.
Yeah,
This is good work. It's not like you're not working in a casino in Las Vegas. So
sure.
I appreciate the work you do. It's my focus is not on you or your work. My focus is on the obsession, as I call it, about race in the country. If
Hmm.
I were talking to a group of feminists, I would talk about the obsession about gender. If
Yeah.
I were talking to trans activists, I would say the obsession about trans issues.
Hmm.
Isn't that counterproductive when the entire neighborhood is on fire? Is my only question. Because for a lot of people, they don't care what happens to
Yeah.
the neighborhood, provided they can get rights for their group. And I'm not even arguing with them. It's just
Yeah.
useful for me to know that I can't count on them for support in terms of preventing my house from burning down, because they are more concerned about the petunias or
Wow.
the organic garden that they have. And I'm not, I'm just stepping away from that battle because I'm not in the business of persuading anyone. I'm
Yeah.
just distressed for the sake of the house.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me personally, kind of how I'm coming at this is what I'm banking on is that this will be perhaps unproductive in the short term, but ultimately more productive in the long term.
What exactly are you referring to?
In terms of our the impact of focusing on race on our democracy.
I see.
Right. So, kind of the way that I understand my focus on race is that there's for people that are affected by issues of race and racism, it's alleviating some of that upfront immediate pain so that people can refocus. Because from what I know is when you are confused and you are in pain, it's hard not to obsess with about that, right? You can tell somebody not to scratch an itch or not to pick a scab, and you know that they're going to,
Right, right.
right? They'll even debate it with themselves in their head. Is this a good idea? I know I shouldn't be doing this, and they'll do it. Why? Because the relief that they experience is so immediate that the mind will rationalize its value, its worth.
I think, Rico, you and I are talking about coming at this from two completely different places.
I think we are.
I think you are very sensitive to where people are. I'm very sensitive to the collapse of the entire system. I am not right now because of the crisis.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way: the house is burning. At this point in time, if my 5-year-old throws a tantrum, I don't care.
Yeah.
If my wife wants to pick a fight with me because I yelled at her, at that point when the house is burning, I don't care. I love my wife dearly. If I had a
Yeah.
5-year-old, I would love him totally dearly. But for me, it's about a crisis.
I
And
understand that,
for me,
but how
no,
can you get people to join you
no,
in
please,
putting the
please,
thing
please,
out?
please, you're not understanding my point. You're not understanding my point. You can't, it's too late. I agree with you. We have been utterly uneducated about this. We have developed, whether it's in India or France or the US, we have developed a population that is not democratic at all,
Yeah.
that doesn't understand freedom, that doesn't understand rights. And this is the larger thesis that I have. My larger thesis is that we are not fit for democratic societies. We are crude, We do not know how to communicate. We are not generous with people who disagree with us. And at the same time, we are self centered. We want our rights and our freedoms, even if our
Yep.
neighbor doesn't get them. That's
Hmm.
identity politics today. So let me be very clear. And I'm glad that at the end of the conversation, we are looking at the larger picture. For me, Rico, and maybe not for you, and maybe not for others except at a cognitive level, the democratic system globally is collapsing. And any of those things your people or my people want is going to disappear. It's like what happened to the Rohingya in Myanmar. It's like what happened to and is happening to the uh, Uyghurs in China. It's what is happening to the Muslims in India. This was a brief moment in human history when we had these aspirations
Hmm.
post World War II, primarily post civil rights movements in the 60s. This is disappearing because the house is collapsing and the house is burning. And for me, any focus, leave alone the word obsession, any focus on individual group rights is allowing the fire in the house to be perpetuated. And that for me means there is no short term or long term. We are doomed for the conceivable future, and I have no problems being negative about this. If those who are listening, if you're wondering why I'm negative, come and join me in metaculture courses, because I will walk you through the entire context, which will make you understand how we need to look at these issues differently. Now, Rico, this is great, and there are a couple of questions coming up,
Yeah.
and so the first question is, and would you like to take a stab at it, or maybe I can? It's Champaka Rajgopal, who was the guest at the last session, who says, "Who wins and who loses while saving the burning house?" Great question.
Great
So, would
question.
you like to take a stab at this?
Um, I'll follow up after you.
Okay. Certainly. So, Champaka, great question. And I know where this is coming from because I'm focusing on saving the house. And it's a very legitimate question. And Rico himself could have asked this question, which is that, but isn't there the possibility that if we stop what we are doing and focus on saving the house, we may lose out while the dominant group reinforces their power over us? That's the subtext of that question.
Yeah.
That if I save the house, which was built by the white man, say, for instance, am I not reinforcing the power of the white man? And so I have a simple question for this, not just in the US, but also in India. If we, in trying to save Indian democracy, and as far as I'm concerned, Indian democracy is gone by and large, except for a miracle. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was saying the same thing in India with NGOs and nonprofits and human rights activists saying, do not beat up on a vulnerable Indian state. Try to engage in dialogue with the stakeholders who you disagree with, which are big businesses, which is state and government agencies, the federal government. Uh, Engage with them. And the Indian NGOs attacked me for even suggesting dialogue because they were so clear that you couldn't have dialogue with evil groups. Big business was evil, government was evil because it was corrupt. They didn't want to talk with people who disagreed with them. I'm talking the best people in civil society. They attacked metaculture because we were trying to get them to come to the table 10, 15 years ago on issues related to mining, issues related to biotech, issues related to sweat shops, women's issues, all the above. They didn't want to come. And the question, this question could have been asked there. But if we stop fighting for tribal rights, fighting for women's rights, and if we join you in saving Indian democracy, who will win, who will lose? And my answer today would be, guess what? You didn't help, and now you're totally lost. The This is the part. It's not about the dominant group in India being Hindus, right-wing Hindus, in France being secular, maybe even slightly Islamophobic French people. It's not that they will win. The point is that system was the only system that gave any rights to the rest of us. And if we contribute to destroying that, you're right, we will not win, but the system survives. And if the system survives, there's a possibility of my coming back tomorrow and fighting for my rights. But if I am complicit in letting that system collapse, who is going to help me? The next person who comes in charge of the system, uh, firstly, the system will become authoritarian, or it might become like Mad Max, anarchic. What chance do any of these groups have? So that's my question. That's my response to your question, Champaka. It's not about groups winning or losing. There is value in protecting the system, even if I am disadvantaged in doing so. Sorry, if you have any thoughts, Rico, feel free to ask.
Well, I guess the question that's coming up for me, Ashok, is and even through the course, the metaculture course that I took with you, I guess a question that I never got clarity on is why are you so convinced that this system that you think we really need to fight to preserve is the only one? Is it not possible for us as a species to iterate another system that is different from this, perhaps more equal, perhaps, I don't know, I hesitate to say better, but,
Right. Uh, great
qualitatively
question.
different?
Great question. And I have addressed this in my classes, but I will very briefly say that again. There is everything can be better. I have eternal hope in human creativity, but I also follow history. I also know the evolution of political systems. And I also know that before you reinvent a system, there's enormous chaos and human cost.
Yeah,
And I am not personally willing to allow the US when I say willing, I have no power, but I'm not willing to as- just accept without complaint that the US or France or Germany or Great Britain or India will spend another 150 to 200 years with extraordinary bloodshed and genocide in order to get to a situation like 1947 in India, like post World War II in many Western European countries, Germany, for instance, like 1776 in the US, for the time to be appropriate enough to rebuild that better system. I am quite certain there can be better systems, but this is the only one, like Churchill said, that at this point in time works. My problem with taking it off, and let me try another uh, analogy. If I'm hooked to, if I'm on life support, and you're my best friend, and you believe in natural medicine and organic stuff, you want me to rub certain leaves on my thing, do aromatherapy and all that, and you say, take him out of that, this is killing him. My doctors may say, look, you can take him out because maybe homeopathy works, but do you want to do it right now? Because he could die. So
sure.
for me, if before you experiment with alternate systems, keep the current system because it is the foundation. It's very simple for me. This system is the foundation for any progress in terms of human rights. We will hopefully create a better system tomorrow. But if we take this off, trust me, it's Genghis Khan. Trust me, it's Hitler. Trust me, it's anarchy which will replace. And you're talking in the US of 340 odd million people
Hmm.
fighting and killing each other in order to prove a point that there can be a better system. I can't think of anything more callous. So, anyway, in the interest of time, there's another question which is very interesting. Champaka is related to this again. The process of saving the house is also deeply embedded in the same unequal politics, right? Yes, Champaka, it is. The idea of inequality, as distressing as it may seem for many of us who are at the receiving end of the stick, okay? Whether in India or here, I was not treated equally. I will not be, and I'm not using my example alone. But the point is, I'm expecting to be treated as well as I want before I step in to serve, to save my family or my community or my house or my democracy. Then I am complicit in it breaking down. Yes, this is reality. Uh, I want, I would like Rico to answer A Kerr's question. Why can't we have a win-win? I mean, because you have a background in conflict resolution, so this should
Yeah.
be easy for you. Why can't? Why? Because here I'm saying you have to first save the house before we do anything else. So why can't we have a win-win? Oh, this is
Well,
Ange Kerr.
okay. Let's see. Well, I guess part of her question is also part of mine. Can't we join together and put the fire out? But in hearing you talk about the house, right? So you're still saving that house for someone else, it sounds like.
If you
And
see it as saving it for someone else, it's not your house,
yeah.
and then you're done. You're done.
Yeah, but that's kind of where people are at, and I understand that we're not
I'm not talking
necessarily.
about people. I'm talking about you. If
I know.
you think there's merit in this, then you and I can go to the people. See, that's the point. But if you are constantly talking about why the people will not get it, then I have to say, hey, you and I can't collaborate because you want to meet the people. I want to meet you.
Sure, sure.
My interest is you, not the people right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to address the why can't it be a win-win, what I've understood about conflict is while we can aspire for win-wins more often than not, there are definitely just going to be times where it can't be win-win, where it does have to be zero sum. And I do think that that's kind of a failure of the conflict resolution training that I received is how to be okay with that or how to identify when that is the case. Because I actually think that a lot of conflict resolution principles, they're fantastic for certain situations, but they're certainly not appropriate for all situations everywhere. And in fact, it's part of my responsibility as a practitioner to develop my depth in understanding when that's the case or not.
Rico, I am so grateful that you said that, particularly for all the people who will come, who are mediators and dialogue facilitators. We have started seeing the tools of our trade as panaceas, as silver bullets, and
So dangerous.
that's ridiculous,
So
ridiculous.
dangerous.
Absolutely. And, this brings me back to why I stopped, not quit, but stopped doing conflict resolution work for the immediate future because I do not believe, leave alone minorities, conflict resolution can survive the collapse of the system. Because this system only works, I mean, rather, you can even hope for win win. You can hope for conflict resolution processes, non adversarial processes, only within a Western democratic system because it allows you, at least theoretically, an equal stake, allows you the possibility of an equal stake. It allows you a seat at the table. My wife has been working for many years with her organization on bringing women peace builders to the negotiating table. And this is the work that they do, a wonderful organization called ICANN. And they've been working with Afghani women. And it's absolutely devastating what is happening with their partners today. What's happening with the people they're working, because for 20 years, the American government and military worked through trillions of dollars to get women their rights and to get them a seat at the majlis and the discussion groups and the negotiation table, all of which is going to be wiped out because the Taliban don't give a damn about it. And the fragile, even more fragile than other countries, system that the US and Western governments put into place in Afghanistan, which was based on equality and a
Right.
constitution and everything else, doesn't mean anything in a country where most people don't believe women should have the rights.
It's true.
So that's where that's why I believe conflict resolution, dialogue, mediation only works in if we have a democratic, liberal democratic system. So thank you for saying that. Um, there is another question from Quanta here. How can we focus on exploring on issues of mutual concern currently so that we can work on finding ways to work together to build a better future? Again, a kind of dialogue, conflict resolution kind of a question. So I'd like you to take it up if you can, Rico.
Yeah, sure. Well, when we're talking like mutual concern, if we're talking about dialogue specifically, well, dialogue takes a lot of work to set up, and
Mhm.
it is not action. In fact, it is setting up further action, which can be really frustrating because that takes a lot of time. And as we know in conflict resolution, time is the one thing that we can't move, right? And so again, that kind of goes back to my point, like not everything can be win-win. And it's based on kind of understanding the lay of the land, so to speak. So
Right.
the short answer of how we can focus on exploring issues of mutual concern is to have a system where we can do that, which I think goes to your point, Ashok, for preserving the political system. We have to create not only a culture of doing that, but systems that can handle us doing that.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for reinforcing that, Rico. And I just want to say there is a way we can do that. If organizations like yours and feminist organizations and refugee organizations and all these wonderful groups whose hearts are in the right place, doing wonderful work, if they can educate their people, the people who attend their classes, people who attend their advocacy meetings, to say, you know what, our our needs as trans people or as refugees is important. And at this point in time, the house is burning. Can we also expend some of our energies in protecting the American or French or Indian democracy, even as we try to highlight our group's needs?
Yeah,
That message. See, one of the questions I asked in the one time I was invited by All Aces is when I asked the panel, so what would you preserve in our existing American system? You know what? A couple of people said nothing.
yeah,
If you say nothing, it means you do not have a stake in the house anymore. It means you don't care about the house. All you care about is your room in the house. Or you will care about the house if you have power over every other inhabitant in the house. This, for me, is a problem with democracy. We are not committed to our own nations. We are, and let's just be clear. I'm not a fan of nation states, but I know it's the only thing I have to work with. Okay, in 20 to 40 years, I would love to have a beautifully benign, creative world government. But right now, the little rights I have come from the nation state. And if I don't believe myself, if I don't believe that I have a stake in that, and it's controlled by white people or men or whoever, all kinds of the 1%, and I withdraw, I'm aiding and abetting the collapse of that state. So
yeah,
thank you. There are a couple of other questions. Champaka says, what if the dominant group doesn't think democratic systems are important? For example, the business elites, transparency only impedes deals. Absolutely, Champaka. And this is what I have been working for 22 odd years, a counterintuitive thought. And this is a great conversation, Rico. And I don't know if you or others want to come back because there's so many threads here. Champaka's thread is an important one. When I talk about dialogue in India and in the US and other places, and I've done this for 25 years, and I mean real public complex dialogues. In India, I want NGOs, civil societies, and this was 2005 to 2013 before I realized nothing was going to change. For 8 years, I said, please come to the table. I can get you the biggest corporations. I can get you federal government bureaucrats, senior bureaucrats. They don't want democracy. You want democracy. They're not dependent on democracy. It's minority groups that need democracy. If you don't come to the table, you prove to them that you don't care about democracy either. You just want special interests.
Hmm.
You just want benefits for your group. And if that is the case, if I've had environmental groups, I've had human rights groups that do wonderful advocacy, didn't want to dialogue with the corporations because they saw corporations as evil. I'm talking 10, 15, 18 years ago. Guess what? You send the message saying, who cares for democracy? I just want power. And in that case, you are, as a civil society organization, you cannot beat the 1%. They have all the power. They are choosing not to exercise it in a democratic system. The moment you say you are also not interested in democracy enough to invest, they will say, you know what? We don't really need it. We are happy having all the power. So, this is my counterintuitive response to you, Champaka. The dominant groups do not need democracy. It is only the minorities that need democracy. For the dominant groups, it's like a pat on the back. Oh, she's powerful. He's powerful, but they are willing to carve out some space. And that is the basis of democracy. It's not complete equality, which is ridiculous. It doesn't happen. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen in nature.
Right.
It really doesn't. There's one more. Do you want to take that? This is for Rico. The
Sure.
Qantas, the last one.
Right. So, what if the dominant group? Oh no. What about healthcare, education, fair compensation for work, infrastructure issues, mutual protection, public safety? Uh, so, what's the question? What about it? So I mean, if without realizing we are focusing on superficially divisive issues, or is it insidiously promoted that way? I'm not 100% sure that I understand the question,
Can
but
I just take a crack at her question? Not to
yeah,
answer, but to reframe the question for
yeah.
you. What I think I'm hearing Qantas say or ask you, Rico, is why can't we focus on healthcare, education, fair compensation, etc., instead of issues of race and gender, which might be
Ah,
divisive? That's,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm presuming that's what she's asking. But why don't
Okay.
you respond to that? And if she has another thought, she can ask that also.
Sure. Well, I guess one thing about that I've really learned about racism, I talked about how sometimes it's like an itch that you can't help but scratch, right? But people compare themselves to one another all the time, right? And one of the constants there, of course, is race. Like I'm not always somebody that needs health care, but I am always somebody that looks like this, right? So I think that Quanta is right that we could be focusing on these things, but I'm guessing that the reason that we don't is because each one of those things that were listed and right, fair compensation for work. Like let's say, like right now, let's say that I'm being fairly compensated, but I get another job that appeals to be more in some way, and it's not as fairly compensated. That's mutable, right? Infrastructure issues, mutual protection. Again, I'm not always motivated to care about infrastructure issues. When the bridge is there and I can use it every day, that's fine. I only really care about it when it collapses, you know? And I understand that that's a failure on my part. But there's something about the way that human brains work. And we don't really care unless something is actively on fire, to your point, Ashok.
Thank you. Thank you for putting it up so clearly, Rico. And I think, yes, to sum up our conversation today, we're just scratching the surface. While you and I are of one mind in terms of many things, including conflict resolution and its, limitations and all of that, I think you and I are also not too far apart, even on the crisis of the burning house. We're coming at it from different places. You're coming at it, I believe, from the place that the people are not ready to hear about it because they are preoccupied with their rich. And I'm coming at it saying, I've been working on the itch for 25 years. People are almost never going to think about infrastructure or democracy. They will only keep digging deeper into their itch. And right now, the house is burning. So
Yeah.
that's a difference of just positioning. Rico, I knew we would unearth a lot of tough issues. I
Yeah.
really, really appreciate this, and I do hope that you will come back. And I mean, I'm playing around with this format.
Yeah.
Maybe we can even have another person who can add another
Yeah.
perspective for the three of us to work on this. And I really, I don't know if I said this before, but the fact that you have a background in poetry and then conflict resolution, it's just, there are so few people I know, because I have a background in basically visual arts and
Yeah.
writing, not poetry, but writing and conflict resolution. So, we are brothers under the hood, man. Uh,
Yeah. But yeah, I'd
thank
love to
you.
come back. This was a fantastic time, and thank you for pushing me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I know it's your girlfriend's birthday. Please wish Mihika for me, and go out and pull out all stops and give her a wonderful time today.
Thank you. I
uh,
will. Yeah.
Thank you, Rico. We'll debrief after this last message from the sponsor. Okay.
Sounds good.
So, Shri, you can bring on the poster. And a big thank you for everyone who is here now. I really appreciate the fact that you joined us. And I would like to invite you to spread the word about a complex cause. I say complex because it is genuinely going to change the way you look at diversity. It is going to change the way in which we look at issues of race and gender, etc. right now. Please try to come for it. It is on Saturdays. It's 12 consecutive Saturdays. It's from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. EST. Do try to come, because I think you will have a really different perspective on all these issues that Rico and I have been talking about, and even more. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead. Take care. For those of you